Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and for saving the best till last. Sorry. So I would like, if I may, ask you to cast your mind back to the halcyon days of 2009. 2009, President Obama was in his first year in office. Avatar ruled at the box office, and the British tabloids were screaming about swine flu. Swine flu would kill us all. And so I have some personal experience of this. So in the fall of that year, in about November, I fell sick. I felt lousy, I had a fever, I was coughing, I was sneezing. So I went to my physician, and my physician said, well, you have flu. And me being a knowledgeable virologist, I assumed that I had swine flu because I knew that that was the major flu circulating at the time. So I sat at home for a few days, watched bad TV, drank a lot of tea, and then I was back to my usual self and back at work. Fast forward to February of 2010, and I began to feel not so great again. Only this time, I started behaving very strangely. The people in my lab said that I would be staring off into space, or halfway through talking to them, I would just stop randomly. And it turned out that I had actually this time acquired swine flu, only it had caused brain dysfunction. So after about 6 days of this, I had a seizure. And during that seizure, I fell on the ground and broke my shoulder in 3 places, right up here. I was rushed off to the ICU, and I spent 9 days in the ICU. And then I ended up with this, a total shoulder replacement, 6 months of physiotherapy, and a fairly good arm. And I'm very grateful to the surgeon for that. So, you know, on a personal level, I can appreciate the irony of this, although I suspect my wife cannot. But what about on a more global level? Well, this is a photograph of a military hospital in Kansas in 1918. And at this hospital, you can see a large number of beds and a large number of medical staff with face masks. And this hospital was preparing for an influx of troops that had caught Spanish flu. And Spanish flu appeared early in 1918, actually at a military camp in the US, spread around the world very rapidly, and killed approximately 50 million people. That's 50 million people. Now, if you think about 1918, there wasn't the Model T Ford with Laurel and Hardy in it. Charles Lindbergh, the proto-fascist, had not yet flown across the Atlantic, and Atlanta was not yet a Delta hub. So you can imagine in these days of widespread travel, as Rebecca alluded to earlier, how rapidly a similar virus could spread. Within days, it could be all over the world. And the estimate is that upwards of 200 million people would die if a similar virus appeared in this day and age. And that has all sorts of consequences. So another personal issue, I'm a type 1 diabetic, which is perhaps why I developed this central nervous system swine flu. And as a type 1 diabetic, I need insulin, and this is one of the insulins I use. And this insulin is actually made in Denmark. It is not made here in the US. It is made in Denmark. It is taken by truck to Copenhagen, loaded onto a container ship, shipped over to New Jersey, and then driven to my local CVS, where I pop down and pick it up, along with a soda or something like that. So if you think about what I've just told you about how many people could get sick if we have a bad flu season, think about what would happen to my insulin. If the guys at the factory in Copenhagen, in Denmark, get sick or even die, they cannot make the insulin. If the guys who load on the containers at the port in Copenhagen die, the insulin could be made but can't get onto the ships. The same with the people that ship it across the ocean, the FedEx guy who takes it to my local CVS. And even if it gets to the CVS, if the people that work there are too sick to open the CVS, I still can't get my insulin, assuming that I'm not too sick to get to CVS myself. And this is true for so many of the things that we take for granted and we use in our modern lives. Not just medications, although medications are a major issue here, but foodstuffs, other kinds of disposables and things we use in our everyday lives. So a really, really bad flu pandemic could completely disrupt everything that we do and lead to a situation called teotihuaca. Is anyone here a prepper? Okay, if you're not a prepper, one of those crazy people that has that like silo in the woods where they hide out for the end of the world, teotihuaca is the end of the world as we know it. And a really, really bad pandemic actually could do that. Okay. But I hear you say, but Ian, this isn't a worry. We have vaccines. Okay. Well, yes, we have vaccines, but vaccines have some problems. As you all know, every year in October, November, you hear you've got to go get a flu shot. Everyone go get a flu shot. OSU tell people to get a flu shot. Why do you have to get one every year? You don't have to get a measles vaccine every year. You get measles vaccines when you're a little baby, and you never have to get them again. Well, the reason is that flu viruses are kind of stupid. And when they make copies of themselves, they don't do a very good job, and they make a lot of mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes kill the virus, but other times they make a virus that's actually better than its parents. And that virus has a better chance of replicating, a better chance of spreading between people. And so what happens is that every January or February, a group of the bigwigs in the flu field, I'm not one of those, get together and they look at the viruses that are circulating in the human population all over the world. And based upon that, they place their bets on which viruses will be around that fall. And based on that information, they go to the vaccine manufacturers and say, this year's vaccine needs to contain this virus, and this virus. And the vaccine manufacturers begin their process, which takes 5 or 6 months. Now, most years this is okay. But in 2009, what happened was the horse at the back suddenly appeared at the post first. The vaccine manufacturer had already started, and suddenly this new swine flu virus appeared in Mexico City out of nowhere, which meant the vaccine manufacturers had to stop what they were doing, go back to the beginning, and start making vaccines all over again. And that meant vaccines didn't become really available at all before November, and there wasn't really enough for the whole population until about March. And if you all remember, there were prioritizations for healthcare workers, pregnant women, and so on. The other issue with vaccines is that people don't always get vaccinated. They listen to Jenny McCarthy and think that vaccines are evil. And even if you do get vaccinated, the vaccines only work about 70% of the time. So what about these antivirals? You've all seen these ads for Tamiflu with the giant guy who feels really ill, trying to go around his house, and then he goes to the doctors and gets Tamiflu and shrinks back to normal. It doesn't actually make you physically shrink. But this drug is supposed to stop the virus from replicating and make you feel better. Well, Tamiflu has some problems as well. First of all, it only really works when you take it very early in infection, when you really are just starting to feel ill. And most of us either can't get an appointment with our physician that early, or we kind of tough it out for a few days until we just hit the point that we can barely get out of bed, and then we go see a physician. And by that time, Tamiflu really has no benefit whatsoever. Okay. So what's the problem in flu? What's really going on in flu? And this is what my research is all about. What is flu doing to us that makes it so bad? Well, the real basic, simple problem with flu is that it makes it difficult for us to get enough oxygen into the blood. And this happens because flu makes the lungs fill with fluid, it makes the lungs stiffer, the airways get narrowed, and all of that means it's really hard to get air in and out. And if it's really hard to get air in and out, it's really hard to get oxygen in the bloodstream. You can't breathe in and out properly. And if this gets bad enough, you end up like this unfortunate gentleman here in the ICU with a tube down his throat, being mechanically ventilated and with all sorts of wires hooked to him. And this is a terrible situation, and 40% of these people will die. But even more significantly, this is a very, very specialized operation. Very, very specialized equipment, machines that go ping, very highly trained medical staff. You cannot just pull an ICU out of nowhere. So let's consider our hometown, Columbus, Ohio. Current estimates are 2 million people live in Columbus, Ohio. To serve that 2 million people, we have about 400, maybe 450 ICU beds for 2 million people. And on any given day, a good 2/3 of those are already occupied by people who've been in road traffic accidents, been in other kinds of trauma, post-surgery, et cetera, et cetera. So we have very little wiggle room when it comes to ICUs. So you can imagine if our morbidity from flu really starts to go up and we have more and more people that need to go into an ICU, we're going to run out of beds and those people are going to die. And in fact, even in 2009, as mild as it was, the OSU hospital was at maximum capacity. So my research is focused on how can we make it easier for people to breathe? Because if they can breathe better, maybe they can just stay at home. You know, as Rebecca said, they can stay home, not infect everybody else, which we should all do anyway. But, you know, they'll feel sick, they'll feel lousy, but they won't get so bad that they have to go into the hospital. And also, not as many of them will die, and society will not collapse, which would be a good thing. Okay, sorry, I've stopped going. So one of the things I'm interested in is a substance called surfactant. And surfactant lines the lung and makes it easy for the lungs to expand and contract. And if you don't have surfactant, the lungs collapse and you cannot expand them at all. And under those circumstances, you will die because you cannot get any oxygen into the blood. And one of the things that we found actually fairly recently is that the surfactant lipids that make up the majority of this substance, there's a vital precursor that when you get infected with flu, it stops it being made, which means you cannot make surfactant because you cannot make this molecule that you need to make surfactant. So I came up with the idea of, well, if we can't make this molecule, maybe we could just give it as a drug. And my work is done in mice. I usually use these cute little black mice that like to bite. And one of the readouts we use is this little device on the right here. A lot of physicians now, when you go to the physician's office, stick this thing on your finger and you're looking at it going, why are you doing this? Well, what this is a pulse oximeter. And it tells you how much oxygen is in your bloodstream. And any normal person, it should read about 98%. Now, we have one of these for our mice, and we can use this as one index of how sick are our mice. Do our treatments work? So here's an example of some work that we've done. This is a mouse model of infection where we infected mice for 6 days, and they get very, very sick over that time. And the graph shows a measure of how much oxygen is in their bloodstream. In the black bar is a normal mouse, and you can see it's about 98%. So it's essentially the same as a normal human. But after 6 days of infection in the red bar, you can see that that's dropped very significantly. Now you're at about 85%. And a SAT of 85%, if it were one of you, would be enough to probably put you in the hospital. Might not be quite enough to put you in the ICU, but it would certainly put you in the hospital. In the blue bar, we have mice that were treated after infection with a drug that I'm going to call drug X because we're patenting it right now, and if I tell you what it is, I will never become rich. And my wife will divorce me. And then in the green bar, we have a second drug that we added on, and you can see we essentially get our SATs back to normal, which is fantastic. This drug also has anti-inflammatory effects. Here we're just looking at the white blood cells that come into the lung after infection, and you can see that there are a lot less of them when we treat with this drug. And also, most exciting to me, if we take a mouse that's already very, very sick and we just give it a single dose of this drug at day 5, you can see we get a really good improvement in oxygenation. Again, you would be, at this point, you would be sick, but you probably would not be sick enough that you would have to go into hospital. So I'd like to say that I'm hoping that my drugs will make Michael Stipe feel fine and perhaps he'll stop feeling blue. These drugs are cheap, they're safe, they're stable, so hopefully we could make stockpiles that in the event of a pandemic we could distribute out into the population. So I think that flu may not kill us all after all. Thank you.